He had made grown men weep with a single glance. He had silenced rooms full of killers. But at 36,000 feet, one 7-month-old girl was destroying him completely, and every passenger on Flight 447 was too terrified to help. Every passenger except her. The first thing people noticed about Nikolai Voss was his stillness. Not the stillness of a calm man. Not the stillness of a patient one. It was the stillness of something coiled, a predator resting between hunts, conserving energy it could release in an instant with devastating precision. He stood at the boarding gate of Terminal C at JFK like a monolith in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the crowd parted around him the way water parts around stone. Not because they knew his name. Most of them didn't. But the body knows danger before the mind can explain it, and every person who glanced at Nikolai Voss found a sudden urgent reason to look somewhere else. He was 38 years old. 6'3". Dark hair, silver at the temples, cut close. A jaw that looked like it had been carved by someone who was angry at marble. His eyes were a gray so pale they read as colorless under fluorescent light, and they moved constantly, cataloging exits, reading faces, calculating distances. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive in his particular line of work. His line of work was not something listed on his passport. The passport said, Nikolai Voss. Import, export. New York. What it did not say was that half the dockworkers in Brooklyn answered to him. That 3 city councilmen had his personal number saved under fake names. That there was a file on him at the FBI field office in Manhattan that was 47 pages long and contained, legally speaking, almost nothing they could use. What it also did not say, what nothing in his carefully constructed life had prepared him for, was the small, car seat-strapped, absolutely furious human being currently attached to his left arm. Mila. 7 months old. 8.5 pounds of pure, undiluted chaos. She had her mother's dark curls and, apparently, her mother's refusal to be ignored. She had been crying, on and off, for the past 40 minutes, ever since Nikolai had arrived at the airport with her diaper bag slung over his suited shoulder like a man carrying a weapon he didn't know how to use. His head of security, a former Interpol agent named Darius who feared very little on earth, had taken one look at the baby and the diaper bag and the expression on Nikolai's face and said, very quietly, "Boss, are you sure you don't want me to?" "Get the car," Nikolai had said. Darius got the car. And now Nikolai stood at the gate, alone, for the first time in years, in the way that actually meant alone, with a 7-month-old who had decided that existence itself was an offense worth screaming about. "Shoo," he said, for perhaps the 40th time. His voice, which had delivered sentences that ended careers and, on darker occasions, lives, came out stiff and uncertain. Mila. Shoo. Mila disagreed. He had exactly 12 days to get her to Milan. His sister Anya was there, the only person on the planet he trusted with the baby, the only person who had agreed to take her while he dealt with a situation in Rome that required his personal attention and absolutely could not involve an infant. 12 days. 1 transatlantic flight. How hard could it be? He was beginning to understand that he had dramatically underestimated this. 3 rows back and across the aisle, in seat 24B, middle seat, because that was the only thing left when she'd booked 6 weeks ago during a half-price sale she'd nearly missed because Theo had knocked her coffee onto her laptop. Clara Reyes was performing the quiet, practiced miracle of making herself small. She was good at it. 31 years of being overlooked had given her a talent for invisibility that she sometimes thought was the only superpower single motherhood had awarded her. She was 5'4", with warm brown skin and dark eyes that noticed everything and gave away very little. Her hair was pulled back in the particular kind of bun that said I had 6 minutes this morning and I used 4 of them finding someone's other shoe. She wore dark jeans, a soft gray sweater that had been washed so many times it had achieved a kind of philosophical softness, and the specific expression of a woman who is holding 17 things together simultaneously and has simply decided not to make a face about it. On her lap was a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes for her son, asleep, miraculously, in the window seat beside her, 1 change of clothes for herself, 3 juice boxes, an iPad with 17 downloaded episodes of a dinosaur show, a small first aid kit, for granola bars, a library book she would not get to read, earbuds with a broken left side, and a photograph tucked into the front pocket that she hadn't looked at in 2 months because she wasn't ready yet. Her son's name was Marco. He was 4 years old. He had his father's eyelashes, which felt, some days, like a small beautiful cruelty the universe had decided to keep inflicting on her. She and Marco were flying to Milan because her Aunt Rosa had gotten sick, not critically, not yet, but the kind of sick where I'll visit soon becomes I should have gone sooner if you wait too long. Clara had scraped together the money over 3 months. She'd taken extra shifts at the restaurant where she waitressed Tuesday through Saturday, and she'd sold the nice camera she'd kept from before, from the life she'd had plans in, before the plans changed. She'd paid for the tickets in 2 installments and felt simultaneously proud and terrified, the way she felt about most things she did for Marco. The flight was 11 hours. She could do 11 hours. She was, if nothing else, experienced at enduring. She had her earbuds in, the right one, which still worked, and was just beginning to convince herself that she might actually rest for 20 minutes when the crying started. Not Marco. Marco was out cold, head tilted against the window with his mouth slightly open, looking, as he always did when he slept, unbearably sweet and young and like someone she would walk through fire for without a second thought. The crying was coming from the front of the cabin. Clara pulled out her one working earbud and listened. It was a baby. Young, under a year, she'd guess, from the pitch and the pattern of it. The kind of cry that wasn't pain or hunger but overwhelm, too much noise, too much light, too much strangeness, the particular existential distress of a small person who has been removed from everything familiar and placed in a loud metal tube hurtling through the sky. She knew that cry. She had lived inside that cry for approximately the first 4 months of Marco's life. Around her, she watched the other passengers do what people do on planes when a baby cries. They put their headphones on. They turned to the window. They became very interested in the in-flight magazine. They performed, with impressive unanimity, the collective fiction that they could not hear what everyone could clearly hear. Clara turned toward the front of the cabin. The man holding the baby was impossible to miss. Not just because of his size, or the suit, or the particular quality of contained intensity he radiated even in the act of bouncing a screaming infant. It was the contrast, this massive, clearly powerful, clearly dangerous man holding a tiny girl with an expression on his face that Clara recognized from the inside. It was the expression of someone who desperately wants to help and has absolutely no idea how. She watched him try. He bounced her. He swayed. He said something. She couldn't hear it over the engine noise and the crying, but she could read the shape of shoe on his lips. He tried the pacifier. He tried the bottle. He tried turning her to face outward, then inward, then resting her against his chest. Nothing worked. Around him, the nearest passengers had migrated, subtly, toward the far edges of their seats. A flight attendant had approached once, offered a blanket and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and retreated. Nobody helped. Clara looked at Marco, still sleeping, small chest rising and falling. She looked at her one working earbud. She looked at the man in the front, and the baby screaming against his shoulder, and his enormous, uncertain hands. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt. If you've ever watched someone do the brave thing when everyone else looked away, drop a comment below. This story is for every person who ever chose courage when it was easier to be invisible. The aisle of a plane at cruising altitude is not a generous space. Clara moved through it anyway, excusing herself past a man in an aisle seat who looked at her like she was walking toward a fire, which, in a manner of speaking, she was. She could feel the eyes of other passengers tracking her, that particular quality of collective attention that happens when someone does something the group has silently agreed not to do. She didn't look back. She focused on the sound. The baby's crying had shifted in the last few minutes. She'd learned, in those long early months with Marco, to read the different registers of infant distress the way a musician reads key changes. This one had moved past frustration into something rawer. Exhaustion underneath the noise. The kind of crying that feeds itself, that the baby can't stop even when she wants to, because she's too tired and too wound up and too far past the point where anything makes sense. She knew that place. She'd sat in it herself, on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m., Marco screaming in the other room, completely alone, wondering if she was failing at the most fundamental thing a person could be asked to do. She stopped at row 6. The man looked up. Up close, he was even more arresting than he'd appeared from a distance, not handsome in any soft sense of the word, but striking the way weather is striking, the way you describe a storm as beautiful even while acknowledging it could level a building. His pale eyes found her face with a precision that made her feel briefly, oddly, like something being assessed. She had the strange sensation that this man was deciding, in the space of about 2 seconds, whether she was a threat. She kept her voice low and even. Years of waitressing had given her the ability to be heard clearly without raising her pitch. "Do you want help?" The question landed in the space between them. Simple. Direct. No performance of sympathy in it, no cooing, no the poor man tone that would have made him, she suspected, close off entirely. He stared at her. The baby screamed. Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite gratitude. It wasn't quite pride surrendering. It was more specific than either of those. It was the expression of a man who has spent years being the person others come to for solutions, suddenly confronted with a problem he cannot solve, and being offered a hand by someone who has no reason to offer it and no idea who he is. It cracked something in him. She could see it. Just slightly. Just enough. "She won't stop," he said. His voice was low, accented faintly, Eastern European, she thought, though she couldn't have said where exactly. There was something almost bewildered in the words, like he was reporting an enemy's surprising tactical advantage. "I know," Clara said. "Can I hold her?" Another beat of that pale-eyed assessment. Then, with the careful movement of a man handling something he doesn't fully trust himself with, he held the baby out. Mila came into Clara's arms mid-scream, small body rigid with outrage, fists clenched, face a perfect red moon of displeasure. Clara took her the way she'd taken Marco 1,000 times, one hand under the bottom, one supporting the back, turning her so she was facing outward, back against Clara's chest, both of them looking the same direction. Then Clara started to move. It wasn't anything complicated. A slight, rhythmic side-to-side sway, not too fast, not slow enough to be ineffective. The weight shifting from foot to foot in a rocking motion that the body remembers before the mind does. And underneath it, almost below the level of conscious decision, she started to hum. Not a song, exactly. A sound. Low and continuous, the frequency of it more than the melody, something that goes into a baby's chest and tells a nervous system, slow down. "You are not alone. I have you." Mila's screaming cut off like someone had found a switch. Not immediately. First it stuttered, one long wail that lost steam halfway through, dissolved into hiccuping sobs, then softer sounds, then a wet sniff. The rigid little body slowly, incrementally, released. Fists unclenched. The small dark head dropped back against Clara's collarbone. The silence that followed was extraordinary. The entire section of the cabin seemed to exhale at once, a collective decompression so synchronized it was almost comical. Someone 3 rows back made a quiet sound of pure relief. The flight attendant at the front galley looked over and pressed her hand to her chest. Clara kept swaying. Kept humming. And she looked up to find Nikolai Voss watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something raw underneath the careful control of it. Something that looked, if she was being precise, like a man confronting a feeling he had no category for. "How did you?" he started. "For years of practice," she said quietly, so as not to break the fragile calm she'd built. "She's exhausted. She just needs someone to tell her it's okay to sleep." He sat down slowly in the window seat beside where she stood, like his legs had decided to stop consulting him. He looked at the baby, Mila, now going heavy-lidded against Clara's chest, and something in his face did a thing that faces do when they're trying not to show that something has broken through. "I've been holding her for 2 hours," he said. "I didn't know," he stopped. Started again. "I don't know how to do this." It was perhaps the most honest sentence he had spoken in years. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd come up the aisle. Not at the suit or the intensity or the aura of barely contained danger. At the circles under his eyes. At the diaper bag that had been packed by someone who clearly knew what they were doing, the baby's things were organized, the formula correctly measured, the pacifier clipped where it should be, which meant he hadn't packed it himself, which meant someone had tried to prepare him and he was trying his best with instructions he hadn't had time to internalize. At the way his hands rested on his knees, very still, very controlled, the knuckles of one hand slightly paler than the rest. He was terrified. Not of her. Not of the plane. Of the baby. Of getting it wrong. Of this small person who had been placed in his care and whose distress he couldn't fix and whose language he didn't speak. Clara had felt that terror from the inside. She knew its exact dimensions. Nobody does, she said simply. You learn. Mila slept. It seemed almost impossible, this furious little creature who had held an entire cabin hostage for 2 hours, now slack and soft against a stranger's chest, mouth slightly open, lashes dark against her cheeks. She looked, in sleep, like a painting of a sleeping baby, that particular perfection that makes adults around sleeping children involuntarily lower their voices and walk on softer feet. Clara lowered herself carefully into the aisle seat beside Nikolai. He'd moved to the window, leaving it open as though it hadn't been a conscious invitation but simply a practical arrangement. She held Mila slightly angled away from her body, the way she'd learned to hold Marco when he slept against her on transit buses, keeping one arm free. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 11 hours is a strange kind of time. Not quite real life. A suspension of the usual rules of social architecture, the ordinary walls people keep between themselves and strangers. Something about altitude, about shared space, about the particular intimacy of darkness outside and engine hum inside, it loosens things. She's not mine, Nikolai said quietly. Not defensive. Just informational, as though he'd been waiting for someone to ask and had decided to answer the unspoken question before it became awkward. She's my sister's. Katya. He stopped. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There was an accident. 6 weeks ago. Katya is alive, she is, another pause, careful, recovering. But she cannot travel. I am taking Mila to my other sister in Milan. Anya. She will care for her while Katya, he stopped again. Clara didn't fill the silence. She'd learned that some silences needed to be left alone to finish themselves. While Katya gets better, he finished. As though saying it with enough certainty might make it more true. Clara looked down at Mila. How old? 7 months. And before 6 weeks ago, you weren't. No, he said. I was not. I am not, he seemed to search for the word and not quite find it. I am not someone who does this. Children. This is not, he made a gesture with one hand. This is not my world. What is your world, she asked. The question was genuine. Curious, not pointed. She had the quality, he was beginning to notice, of asking things without performing the asking, no coyness, no agenda visible in it. He looked at her. Business, he said. She accepted this at face value. Or at least she appeared to. Something behind her eyes said she was filing it alongside other observations she'd made and wasn't commenting on. And you've had her for 6 weeks. Yes. Alone. A pause. I have staff. Staff isn't the same, she said. He looked at her sharply. Not hostility, recognition. The particular edge of a truth arriving faster than expected. No, he said quietly. It is not. The engine hum settled around them. Mila's chest rose and fell with the deep, boneless rhythm of infant sleep. I'm Clara, she said. I'm in 24B if she wakes up again and you need. Why are you doing this? He asked. The question came out more abrupt than he perhaps intended, not rudeness, but a genuine inability to account for it. In his experience, people did things for reasons. They helped because they wanted something, or because they feared what happened if they didn't, or because there was a transaction underneath the gesture. He had operated in transactional worlds for so long that pure, uncomplicated human decency had become something he had to consciously remember was possible. Clara considered the question as though it deserved real consideration. Because she was crying and you were struggling and no one else was going to. That is all. That's enough. He studied her face. Looking for the angle. Finding none. It unsettled him more than the crying had. He found himself talking. This was unusual. Nikolai Voss had not voluntarily talked to a stranger about anything real and, he couldn't actually calculate how long. Years. He dealt in silences and careful words, in implications and strategic omissions. He had sat across tables from federal prosecutors and said less than was comfortable and more than was wise and navigated the gap between them like a man walking a wire. He was not, by any measure, someone who talked on planes. And yet. Maybe it was the altitude. Maybe it was the baby sleeping between them like a small warm anchor. Maybe it was the fact that she was the first person in 6 weeks who had treated him not like a resource or an authority or something to fear, but simply like a person who was having difficulty, and helped accordingly. He asked about her son. She told him about Marco, 4 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs, currently sleeping off the excitement of his first airplane ride. She spoke about him the way parents speak about children when they're being honest rather than performative, not just the wins, but the specific texture of loving someone who is simultaneously your greatest joy and the source of your most exhausting moments. She didn't volunteer information about Marco's father. He didn't ask. But he noticed the absence of it, the slight careful navigation around that particular subject, and he filed it without comment. It is hard, he said, to do it alone. She turned to look at him. Yes. I have been alone with Mila for 6 weeks and I have staff and a house with 8 rooms and I still feel, he stopped. Looked out the dark window. I don't know how you do it. Every day. Without. You do it because they need you to, she said. There's no secret. There's no technique. You just don't stop. Something moved across his face. The particular expression of a person receiving a truth they already knew but needed to hear from outside themselves. My sister, he said quietly, after a moment. Katya. She has done it alone from the beginning. Mila's father left when she was 2 months pregnant. I offered, his jaw tightened, I offered to find him. To have a conversation with him. Clara looked at him. She said no, he said. She said she didn't want that kind of help. Smart woman. His mouth moved, not quite a smile, but a ghost of one. Yes. Another silence. This one was different from the others, warmer, somehow. The kind that exists between people who have said enough true things to trust the quiet between the true things. Then Mila stirred. A small sound, a twitch of the hands. Clara shifted her automatically, adjusting the angle, and the sound subsided. Nikolai watched her do it. Watched the unconscious competence of it, the way her body responded to the baby's signal before her conscious mind even seemed to register it. You're very good at this, he said. I had no choice but to get good at it, she said. Then, softer, that's the thing nobody tells you before you have kids. You find out what you're capable of by having no other option. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Katya is strong. Stronger than I have been about, he stopped. The accident was partly, there were people. Business associates of mine. There was a miscalculation on my part and Katya, he stopped completely. His hands on his knees were very still. She was in the wrong place. Because of a decision I made. Clara was very quiet. She does not blame me, he said. Which is, his voice, for just a moment, lost its certainty. Which is harder than if she did. Clara looked at him for a long moment. At this enormous, controlled, dangerous man, sitting with his hands on his knees in a darkened airplane cabin, saying the truest thing he probably said to anyone. Then take care of her daughter, Clara said simply. That's how you answer for it. If this story is hitting you somewhere real, if you've ever carried something heavy alone and kept going anyway, tell me in the comments. You're not as invisible as you think. 4 hours into the flight, Marco woke up. Clara heard him before she saw him, the particular disoriented sounds of a 4-year-old realizing he was not where he last remembered being, followed by the slightly higher register sound that preceded either an adventure or a meltdown, depending on which direction the next 30 seconds went. She looked back toward row 24. Marco was sitting up, eyes wide, pressing his face to the dark window and then turning to find her gone. She watched his expression begin to shift. She looked at Nikolai. I have to go, he said immediately. And then, before she could hand Mila back, something unexpected happened. He reached out his hands and took the baby with the kind of care that comes from 6 weeks of imperfect practice, not expert, but real. Both hands, properly supporting, adjusting when Mila moved, not pulling back from the contact. I've got her, he said. Clara looked at him. At his hands. At the way he'd adjusted without thinking. You've been paying attention, she said. Something in his face shifted, not the ghost smile from before. Something fuller. Less guarded. I've had a good teacher for the past 2 hours. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went. Marco, reassured by her presence and deeply excited by the revelation that they were on a plane and it was nighttime and there were clouds, was amenable to a juice box and a dinosaur show and a whispered explanation that Mama had been helping someone a few rows up. "Is it a baby?" he asked, with the directness of 4-year-olds, who ask the actual question without social scaffolding. "Yes." "Is it crying?" "It was." "It's sleeping now." "I used to cry on planes," he said with great authority, as though reporting ancient history. "You've never been on a plane before," she pointed out. He considered this. "I cried once at the grocery store." "That's true." He seemed satisfied with this equivalency. He put his headphones on. She sat with him for 20 minutes, making sure he was settled, then slipped back up the aisle, not because she'd made any particular arrangement, but because something drew her back that she hadn't fully named to herself yet. What she found, when she reached row 6, stopped her in the aisle. Nikolai was sitting with Mila against his chest. Not the stiff, uncertain hold of before, this was different. His arm was curved around her properly, her small head in the hollow below his shoulder, his large hands splayed gently across her back. He was not bouncing or swaying or doing anything deliberate. He was just holding her. And he was looking out the dark window, and his face had lost the controlled composure that was its default state, and what was underneath was something she hadn't expected, not hardness, not the severity the rest of him suggested, but something worn open. Something that looked very much like grief doing the slow work of becoming something else. He heard her approach, she suspected he always heard everything, and turned. He looked, briefly, like a man caught in a moment he hadn't meant to share. She sat down. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She went back to sleep," he said finally. "I can see that." Another pause. Outside the window, clouds moved below them, pale shapes in darkness. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you said. About doing it because they need you to. Not stopping." "Yes. I have built things," he said. "Things that required a careful pause, a certain kind of commitment. Things that required me to be a specific kind of person. And I told myself that this was who I was. That there was no other version." Clara listened. "And then Katia," his voice dropped. "And then Mila. And in 6 weeks I have," he looked down at the baby. "I have not slept more than 4 hours at a time. I have learned what formula temperature she prefers. I have learned that she will only fall asleep if someone sings, and I cannot sing, and I have been humming something terrible every night and she has been gracious enough to sleep anyway." Clara felt something move in her chest. "What have you been humming?" He looked briefly mortified. "A Tchaikovsky piece. It is the only thing I could remember that seemed appropriate. It is from a ballet. My mother used to." He stopped. "It worked," Clara said softly. "That's what matters." "Yes." He looked at Mila. "What I am trying to say is," he paused for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might not finish. "I am not certain the version of myself I have been is one that Mila should be around. When I give her to Anya, I will go to Rome and I will deal with what needs dealing with and then I will come back. And I have been," he stopped again. "I have been thinking about what I come back to. What I come back as." The cabin around them was hushed and dark. Most passengers were sleeping. The engine hum wrapped around them like something private. "You don't have to explain yourself to me," Clara said. "I'm a stranger on a plane." "I know," he said. "That is why I can say it." She understood that. She understood it precisely. "Can I tell you something?" she said. He looked at her. "The photograph I have in my bag," she said. "It's of Marco's father and me. Before. When things were different. I haven't looked at it in 2 months because every time I do I feel," she paused, choosing her word carefully, "cheated. Not by him. By myself. By the story I told myself about who I was going to be and what my life was going to look like." She took a breath. "But I am going to Milan to see my sick aunt, and I scraped together every dollar I had to go, and Marco is back there wearing dinosaur headphones and thinking airplane clouds are the greatest thing he's ever seen. And the story I thought I was living isn't the story I'm living, but..." She stopped. "But it is still a story worth living," Nikolai said quietly. She looked at him. Something in her chest loosened by a small, significant degree. Yes. Mila made a small sleep sound between them. They both looked at her. Then at each other. I don't know your name, Clara realized. Nikolai, he said. She nodded. Nikolai. Said it simply, no performance around it. He seemed to find this, the simplicity of it, the absence of the weight his name usually carried, quietly extraordinary. Clara, he said back. Outside, the clouds shifted. Below them, the Atlantic. They landed at Malpensa in the pale grey light of early morning. Milan at dawn has a particular quality, the old stone of it emerging from mist, the mountain suggestions in the distance, the air carrying the particular coolness of a city not yet awake. Clara stood at the luggage carousel with Marco on her hip. He had decided he was too tired to walk but also too excited to be put down, a 4-year-old contradiction she navigated by simply carrying him, and watched the bags arrive with the patience she applied to most things. She had not exchanged numbers with Nikolai. She had considered it. In those last minutes on the plane, something had hummed between them in the particular frequency of two people recognizing each other across the usual distances, circumstance, life, the invisible walls people build between themselves and strangers. She had felt it. She thought he had felt it. But she had also understood, from the things he'd said and the things he hadn't, that he was a man in the middle of a becoming. Not finished. Not yet the version of himself he was, perhaps for the first time, deciding to choose. And she was a woman who had learned, through considerable difficulty, not to need herself to be someone else's catalyst for change. She could be kind to someone. She could reach toward them. She could help. She couldn't do the changing for them. She was thinking about this, half watching the carousel, when Marco said, "Mama. That man has the baby." She turned. Nikolai was 20 feet away, Mila in his arms, a woman beside him, dark-haired, warm-faced, clearly a relative, the family resemblance immediate and striking. This must be Anya. Anya was looking at Mila with the expression of someone seeing something they'd been missing, reaching out already, and Nikolai was. He was looking at Clara. He said something to Anya. She looked over, curious, warm. Then he walked toward Clara with Mila and the particular unhurried certainty of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it out. She slept for 6 hours, he said when he reached her. The rest of the flight. Good. Because of you. Because she was tired, Clara said. I just told her it was okay. He looked at her for a moment. Then at Marco, who was studying him with the frank, unfiltered assessment of a 4-year-old. You have a dinosaur on your shirt, Marco informed him seriously. Nikolai looked down at Mila's onesie, white, with a small green dinosaur print that had clearly been purchased by someone with a sense of humor. He looked back at Marco. Something happened to his face. I do, he agreed. It's a brachiosaurus, Marco said. They were gentle giants. They didn't eat meat. Is that so? Nikolai said. They were very tall, Marco said, looking up at Nikolai with the meaningful expression of someone drawing a comparison. Something that was not quite a ghost smile but an actual, full, real smile crossed Nikolai Vasa's face. It changed his face completely, opened it, warmed it, made him look, just briefly, like someone who had been away for a long time and had just arrived somewhere familiar. Clara stared at him. She had not expected that smile. She thought, privately, that most people who encountered Nikolai Vas had probably not expected that smile. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced a card. Plain. Black. A phone number, handwritten in the center of it. No name, no business information. Just the number. In case, he started. Then he seemed to decide against the qualification. He simply held the card out. She took it. Looked at it. Looked at him. In Milan, he said, there is a restaurant. Not far from the Duomo. It is, he paused, very good. I own it. She raised an eyebrow. Among other things, he said, and the acknowledgement in it, the small, quiet honesty of it, made her chest do something complicated. Anya will know it. I thought, if you wanted to eat somewhere with Marco, somewhere good. You want to recommend a restaurant, she said. I want to, he stopped. Started again. I want you to know that if you call that number, I will answer. A pause. I don't, he said carefully, make that statement often. She believed him. She looked at the card again. At Marco, who had lost interest in the adult conversation and was watching the luggage carousel with the devotion he gave to anything that moved. At Mila, who was awake now, dark eyes open and calm, looking at Clara with the ancient, knowing expression that very young babies sometimes wear. Okay, Clara said. Nikolai looked at her. Okay. Okay, she repeated. And then, because she was Clara, because she did not perform the things she felt, thank you for letting me help. He seemed to find this, being thanked for being helped, disorienting in the most genuine way. I should be. I needed it too, she said quietly. Sometimes helping someone else is how you remember you're still capable of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you are very strange. I've been told, she agreed. I mean it as a, he seemed to search for the word. I mean it as the opposite of an insult. I know, she said. I took it that way. Anya appeared at Nikolai's shoulder, Mila now transferred to her arms, the baby making a small satisfied sound at the new configuration. Anya looked between Nikolai and Clara with the bright, intuitive eyes of a woman who reads situations quickly and has known her brother long enough to identify when something has shifted in him. You must be the miracle woman, Anya said warmly, in English that had an identical accent to Nikolai's. He texted me. He said a woman calmed the baby when he could not. He texted you that? Clara asked, glancing at Nikolai. He looked, briefly, like he wished Anya had not said that. He said other things too, Anya said, with the serene cheerfulness of a sibling who absolutely knows what she is doing. But those are his to say. Marco tugged Clara's sleeve. Mama, our bag. She turned. Their battered blue suitcase was making its way around the carousel. She'd tied a piece of orange ribbon to the handle so she could spot it, which Marco had supervised very seriously. She moved to get it. When she turned back, Nikolai was still standing where she'd left him, watching her with that particular quality of stillness she'd noticed from the very beginning, the coiled, contained quality of it. But something had shifted inside it. Something had been released, or opened, or had simply arrived that hadn't been there before. He looked like a man at the beginning of something. She raised her hand. A small wave. Simple. He raised his. She took Marco's hand, her suitcase in the other, and walked toward arrivals. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The card was in her jacket pocket, and outside, Milan was waking up in the thin gold light of morning, and somewhere in the city her Aunt Rosa was waiting, and Marco was asking whether Milan had dinosaur museums, and she was almost certain, quietly, carefully, without building too much around it, that she was going to call the number. Not today. Not for a week, maybe. But she would call. Because she had learned, in 4 years of not stopping, of carrying things, of finding out what she was made of by having no other option, that sometimes life puts you in a middle seat on a transatlantic flight for no apparent reason, and somewhere in the turbulence of it a door opens that you didn't know was there. And you have a choice. You can put your headphones in. Or you can unbuckle your seatbelt and walk toward what needs you. Clara Reyes had never been very good at leaving things as they were. She walked out into Milan. Behind her, in his sister's arms, Mila slept. Here is what I want to ask you, and I mean this genuinely. Have you ever been the person who got up when everyone else stayed seated? Have you ever done the quiet, unremarkable, brave thing, helped a stranger, stayed when it was easier to leave, said the true thing instead of the comfortable one, and had no idea whether it mattered? It mattered. It always does. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you chose to show up, for a stranger, for someone you loved, for yourself. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness is still the most powerful thing one human being can offer another. Every comment, every share, it tells me to keep telling stories like this one. Don't be invisible.